Hey everybody! So we're moving on to our first unit, and if you're keeping track in the textbook, you'll find that our author talks about putting Napoleon on trial, and he calls that chapter St. Helena, so that is the title of our unit, Unit 1, St. Helena, and this is just a brief overview of some of the events leading up to the French Revolution, causes of the French Revolution, and we're going to move towards Napoleon taking power and then finally being captured, and then what do the great powers of Europe do with him after they have him. So I just want to give you some brief historical context. There's also a video online from John Green, Crash Course World History, the French Revolution, that I think is really good, and I encourage you to look at that. But I'll provide some brief context. And then just trying to get you to think historically and looking at some of these sources on the French Revolution. We'll look at those and then some of these big changes that took place because of the Revolution. The most important document for us is this Declaration of the Rights of Man and of the Citizen. Brief context. If you need to know how French society was structured leading up to the French Revolution, there are three different estates. The clergy is the first estate, then the aristocracy or nobility is the second estate, and then the peasantry is the third estate. So there were no classes necessarily. We call these estates. And those are the three different estates: the aristocracy, the nobility, the monarchy. They are represented here by King Louis XVI, dressed in his royal garb. Very common for a king at this time to look that way, very extravagant and elegant, and that is a representation of the nobility. He's obviously the king, so he's the top of the monarchy there. This is a political cartoon of the third estate, and so you can actually see right here is a person who is sort of hunched over. Here's his legs here. He's hunched over, and on top of him, sitting on top of his back, is a member of the clergy and a member of the aristocracy. Okay, and so the point of that cartoon is that the third estate, the peasantry, they do most all of the work, and the other estates, the clergy and the nobility, benefit from the peasantry. So it's just trying to raise awareness of how unfair and exploitative this system is. We've already mentioned that the Enlightenment takes place in the 1700s. Think about Immanuel Kant. Have the courage to use your own intelligence. This mantra of thinking for oneself without having to be told what to think, especially by members of the clergy or aristocracy. The Americans are going to have their own revolution. The revolution itself begins before 1776. That's when the War of Independence begins. But this is a painting of that time. Surrender of Cornwallis to French troops at the left and American troops at the right. So you actually can see these are French troops over here. Americans will often conveniently forget that the French helped the Americans to win their independence from the British. So here are the French troops here, and obviously here's George Washington and the American colonists there. All right. And then the French are going to have their revolution in 1789. That's when it begins. Now, what I'd like for you to do, we have our teams now. So something you can think about when you look at these primary sources related to the French Revolution. There are three different ones. And when you look at them, think about how you could address this question. What were the significant causes of the revolution? And think about using these skills that historians have. So sourcing. Who created the source? What kind of source is it? Contextualizing. When did they create this? And what else was happening around that time period that can help us make sense of the source? Close reading. Analyze it carefully. Analyze it for specific details. Think about what's there. Think about what might not be there. And then corroborating. These first three sources, looking at Marie Antoinette, Thomas Jefferson, and Abby C.S., look at how these three sources how are they similar from one another, and how are they different? So I've created team discussion boards online, and you can use that forum to discuss these sources in more detail, if that helps. This is a image of the opening of the Estates General in May 1789. So this is a typical looking parliamentary structure with people gathered all around to discuss important issues. The storming of the Bastille is going to take place in July of 1789. That is usually the event that people will point to as the cause of the French Revolution. It's not really the cause. It's certainly the most violent event that people think of at the start, but the revolutionary ideas had been fomenting for a long time. So this is just an example of that revolutionary fervor sort of spilling over. People, the peasants are storming the Bastille. This is supposed to be the Bastille in the back. Historians have since come along and said that the Bastille was not this humongous castle that dwarfed all the other buildings around it. It was actually around the same size as most of the other buildings. But for a painter depicting this image, I guess it looks more impressive to have a humongous castle-like structure that the peasants have brought down. So the storming of the Bastille is an important event in the French Revolution. You begin to see images like this. The Third Estate, they're awakening. And you can see here is a member of the aristocracy. Here's a member of the clergy. And oh, look, here's someone in the peasantry who is breaking off of his chains here. And what's he reaching for? He's reaching for a weapon. So there's this anxiety around this time that the peasantry are going to rise up and take over and start to fight back from the two other estates. This is an image of Maximilien Robespierre, who becomes one of the leading figures of the Third Estate. He was a lawyer by training and becomes a spokesperson for the Third Estate. I have this quote here from him. "Can the law be termed an expression of the general will, when the greater number of those for whom it is made can have no hand in its making?" That's a really important question, and he was trying to advocate for the rights of the Third Estate because they outnumbered the First and Second Estate. If you added members of the clergy and the aristocracy, added them together, it was still a very small number, very small percentage of the overall French population compared to the Third Estate, which was everybody else. This is the moment when the French create the Declaration of the Rights of Man and of the Citizen. I'll try to keep moving my head out of the way so you can see the full image, but this is a depiction of it. The different articles are listed there in French. When you look at a document like this, it's helpful to think about, how did the Enlightenment influence this document? Like, where do you see the Enlightenment influence on this document? How does this document embody these French revolutionary ideas of liberty, equality, and fraternity? And what are its greatest strengths? And what are its greatest weaknesses? Those are just some of the things that you can consider thinking about and discussing online amongst your teammates. The country did create a constitutional monarchy just 2 years later. They were not fully prepared to eliminate the monarchy yet. In 1791, they thought they would maintain the monarchy but have a constitution. And so one of the big changes in that constitution is that there's no longer a king of France, but instead king of the French. And the idea here was that there's a new French nationalism coming into being, and that monarch, that king, is going to be of the French. He's going to be part of that nation. So it seems like a minor distinction, king of France versus king of the French, but it really does reflect the sort of rise of nationalism in France at this time. The Constitution in 1791 did incorporate the Declaration of the Rights of Man and Citizen into that Constitution, so that is supposed to become the law of the land, so to speak. And so this is the France that we find 1789 up to 1791, leading into the early 1790s. Seems like France is moving in a democratic direction. This is the tricolor, the flag of France, the blue, white, and red stripes. It's still the flag of France today. And then these are the mottos of the revolution: liberty, equality and fraternity. And so that is where we see France moving into the early 1790s up until about 1793, 94, and then things take a very dramatic turn. And then we can look at some of that next time. There's going to be a period of terror where Robespierre will begin to use the guillotine to behead anybody who seems to be a threat to this new French government. And then we'll see the rise of Napoleon afterwards. So there are some other readings that we'll look at next time with Napoleon. What kind of leader in general was he? And then talking about the conditions during the Napoleonic Wars. I've got 2 documents there that reflect a Napoleonic soldier talking about a view from the field, and then I have a view from the other side from a French soldier. So that's all I've got, everybody. Have a great day, and I'll see you next time.